this wonderful point two, which I haven't gotten to in weeks. Paragraph 616 of Answer to Job. And one of the big things in Answer to Job is the fact that the feminine is coming in, and Jung is talking about the Pope's papal bull of 1950, in which he allowed the Virgin Mary to go enter into heaven, bodily into heaven alongside us.
Jesus did, yes.
Yeah. But in paragraph 616, though, this is different. Yahweh projects his own tendency to unfaithfulness on a scapegoat, namely Job. He treats Job like a jealous husband, because Job is the personification of Israel, and Yahweh is married to Israel by contract, right? The chosen people, except Yahweh is thinking about not being faithful. So Yahweh is loosening his ties to Israel, and he's claiming that Job would be unfaithful. Okay, Job as the representative of Israel, which is a symbol of the wife of Yahweh, right? and so it's basically like a husband testing a wife. Okay, so he's projecting his own tendency of unfaithfulness on a scapegoat, namely Job, and Yahweh doubts his own faithfulness, and Yahweh remembers Sophia, that was self-reflection, becomes an imperative necessity. Israel becomes like a collective ego, and Yahweh like the self. Yahweh is husband and Israel is wife. And then in Transformation of the God Image, page 57, Edinger says, remember in Anne, Jung, and we've skipped Anne, so now we have to go back to it, but Jung stated that the anima or animus can be realized only through a relation to a partner of the opposite sex, because only in such a relation do their projections become operative. Okay, so in other words, in order for your archetype to get constellated and activated, you have to have a partner of the opposite, and it doesn't have to do with gender, it has to do with whatever your preference is, but if your preference is feminine, you have to have someone with a masculine preference, regardless of their physical gender, to reflect back so that you can live a whole life, so that you can have the experience of wholeness. That's what marriage is about. And I have posited this thing that when we're courting, we are totally focused on our partner, and so we go through this honeymoon period, right, where, oh, this person is exactly the right person for me, and so on. But then, 8 or 10 weeks after the marriage, you're actually living with this person, and people need to understand that there's going to be a time when you're not the other person isn't the perfect reflection of your anima or animus. And when you start to realize that, what happens is the archetype starts to look around. There's this there's this perfect scene in the movie The Natural. Okay, do you remember that movie?
Redford?
Yeah, with Redford anyway, remember the Black Mariah woman comes and shoots him or something, right? But she comes out to the beside the railway station, right? And the great hitter is there, and Redford is going to pitch to him, right? And so she's paying attention to the great hitter, right? And so she's really into the great hitter, and you see that on her face. It was amazingly acted because by the woman, because Redford strikes this guy out, and immediately her eyes go from the hitter to Redford, right? And she, goom, you know, that's my guy now, right? Turns out that that's the guy I'm going to go. It turned out that's the guy I'm going to go shoot. Okay, right? Because she was the dark side. In the natural, she was the dark side. But I love that scene because it actually expresses this idea that, okay, once the honeymoon is over, now that relationship is sealed, and so you don't need to focus on one another anymore, and so suddenly the eye starts to wander.
You promise.
Yeah, and that, I'm sure that's what happens in 50% of divorces.
Yeah. You know, even with
No, not actual involvement. I'm just saying that archetype will look, okay, and you know, I remember when Deb and I were first married, I would, you know, intentionally not look when, like, there would be a beautiful girl on the side of the street, and I would intentionally ignore her because, and Deb later said, 10 years later, she said she appreciated the fact that I didn't look, right? And
while with her.
while she was looking. Actually, I did, but I didn't do it to offend my wife, right?